Breathe. Whaftai lava saviatama for that warm introduction. Malo lei, taloha ni, whakalofalai atu, Nisa Mbula Vanaka, Kia orana, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. O te whatalofa atu le paia man malu o tatou tunu upele nei tai hao. Malo, lava soifua maua malangi ma. And as I stand here before you, I'm a bit shaky because as a Pacific woman, I'm not used to talking about the things that we've done or the great things that I've done personally in my life or in my career. And so I stand here before you as a Samoan woman first and as a leader second. Samoa is my place of birth. Samoa is my heart. Pacific people is my identity. So thank you. I'd like to first acknowledge the esteemed leaders of this conference. I'd like to acknowledge the Board of Dapans, their leader, Sue. I'd also like to acknowledge mana whenua, tangata whenua. As we celebrate Te Wiki o Te Ora Māori, I acknowledge the warm pōwhiri or the whakatau that was done yesterday. And I felt the warmth of the land and of the people, so kia ora whānau. I also like to acknowledge our leaders in the room, especially Sir Mason Jury and Professor Doug Selman, who spoke last night. I'd like to acknowledge our Pacifica family, our colleagues. I'd also like to acknowledge Mātua Pāli'i, who is here representing the voice of the people that we are here to serve. And I lastly acknowledge our leader, Saviatama Whaftai. So, before I start, there is a picture here. This is a picture of Sian, my granddaughter, and her mother, Sophia. And I'll put this picture up because this tells of my connection to mana whenua, to this land, my own personal connection. Sian is 5 years old. She's my only granddaughter and she's the apple of my eye. She's the perfect child, perfect granddaughter. Nothing she does is wrong. And when she plays up, I give her back to her parents. Sian Te Kawa Rapana Channing, 5 years old, with her mum, Sophia Te Kawa Rapana. We laid to rest Sophia 6 months ago at the Te Takinga Marae here in Rotorua. This is where my granddaughter's tipuna are in this land. So my connection to this whanua, to this people, is through my granddaughter, Sian, and through Sophia. So we're whānau. And, I felt that yesterday coming through the doors and being welcomed here by the iwi and by mana whenua of this land. So, whaftai lava. Let's start. Integrated connections, what does this mean in practice? I'm going to go through with you some of the things that I've learned. We're going to talk about the dream. We're going to also go through, I'm going to give you a very quick snapshot, and it's a small snapshot because we only have 45 minutes of the gambling and the gambling harm in Aotearoa. We're also going to talk about, I'm going to highlight through a Pacific lens what that looks like for Pacifica and gambling harm. I'm going to try to illustrate to you how intervention and prevention are connected and how we as a service of Mapumai deliver that in an integrated way. I'm going to talk about connecting ourselves across sectors, and I'm going to give you a few bits to take away with you today. These are my parents. When they came to New Zealand in 1974 and brought us with them, it was the dream to come to a better place. It was the dream for my parents to educate their children, to find opportunities for them that is better than was back home. It was their dream and their goal for a better life, for better working conditions, for better money, for better homes. But the thing of my parents was the focus of their children. My father, Asian descent, Chinese, my mother, Samoan, both dedicated to the dream. And thinking back in 1974, they came over with nothing. As with most of our Pacific families, they came with the dream, the same dream. Nobody comes to New Zealand from the islands to fail. Nobody comes to New Zealand to say, I'm going to go to the land of Aotearoa so I can fail my kids, fail at finding work, fail in life, get stuck into alcohol and drugs and into gambling. Nobody in the Pacific comes with that aspiration. We all come with one dream. Whether it's the dream of our parents or our grandparents, it's the same dream. These are my parents now, almost 50 years later. And for them, that dream has come to fruition through their children. But I know for a lot of our families, that dream hasn't arrived. A lot of our families, they've been lost along the way. We were fortunate. I grew up with my dad playing the horses. He loved TAB. And I grew up waiting for my dad outside the TAB. And I grew up with my mum being involved in church, and housey and bingo was every night. So that behaviour and the gambling behaviour was part of our normal everyday life as Pacific for a lot of us children. That was cool. That was normal. I'm going to give you a snapshot now of what gambling is like in Aotearoa, in New Zealand. And then we're going to come back to that dream later on. We know in New Zealand, 77% of adults gamble in at least one form of gambling a year. We know that. We know that there are popular forms of gambling. There's lotto, there's TAB, there's scratchies, there's instant Kiwis. It's everywhere. Over half of New Zealand Kiwis play lotto. Who here has played lotto? You've got to be in to win, don't you? And when that Powerball goes up, oh my goodness, lotto makes a lot of money out of us. But we've got to be in to win. We've got to live that dream. However, we know that pokie machines are the most harmful form of gambling. The majority of people who come to our services, and it's not just Pacifica, but across the board of all ethnicities, they say that pokie machines are their kryptonite. That's what they're addicted to. Casino gambling is the second largest, but pokie machines is what I'm going to focus on today, because our Pacifica and Māori are being harmed the most by pokie machines in our communities. Last year, $2.33 billion in New Zealand was spent on gambling. For a population of just over 4 million, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And that's adults. There's about 2 million of adults. 2.3 billion was spent. That's $125 million more than the year before. That's $6.4 million a day. With pokies, and these are pokies in the casino, pokies in the clubs and bars, not in the casino. These are pubs and bars. $2.4 million is lost a day on pokies. That's a lot of bread and butter. Last year, each pokie machine took an average of $56,000 each pokie machine. And it was usually from the people who could least afford it. Who could least afford it? Māori and Pacific. Māori and Pacific adults are more likely to be problem gamblers in Aotearoa. For Māori, it's 6.3%. For Pasifika, it's 7.6%. Here's something we're beating Māori in. But seriously, when you compare it to the average of 1.8% of New Zealanders, we're up there. This is just a snapshot. Where are these pokie machines located? Location is everything. We've got just over 15,000 machines outside of casinos. These are pokies and bars and clubs in New Zealand, 15,000. 15,400 to be exact. 438 fewer than last year. We've got just over 1,100 pokie venues in New Zealand. Again, a bit lower than they were last year. 50%, that's over 7,000 machines, are located in the highest deprivation areas of New Zealand. That's in our poorest communities. That's in South Auckland. That's in Far North. It's in Gisborne. It's in Nainai. It's in Porirua. It's in Aranui. Who are living in those places? It's our people. You cannot tell me that our people are not targeted by the industry. Why are we targeted? Why are these machines in our communities? I think you know the answer to that. April to June, $220 million was earned on gaming machine profits. $6.8 million higher than the same period last year. So we're seeing a trend. Pokie machines are going down, 438 fewer than they were last year. Venues are going down. Spending is going up. So what we're seeing is some major concerns in pokie spending, or what's the money that's going through pokie machines in our poorer areas, from people who can least afford it. We have a theory. We have a theory that we haven't been able to prove yet, but it's related to crime proceeds, and it's related to money laundering. But we haven't been able to prove it. We will. But sadly, problem gambling is not a standalone issue. We know that. We know that it is connected to coexisting issues that we are all working with. It's coexisting, it's there, it's connected to anxiety, to alcohol, to depression, to drugs, to even ADHD. We know it's connected to family violence. We know it's connected to domestic violence. And we've got some figures here of the high correlation. I mean, for the general population, 14.6% suffer from depression. With a problem gambler and those who come to services, it's around 41% of problem gamblers come through with anxiety and depression. Alcohol, 73% of gamblers have an alcohol problem. So there's a huge connection. Problem gambling is an addiction to coexisting issues. Now, this is not just the gambler as well. We also look at the affected others. We look at family and friends who are harmed by someone's gambling. And they also feature highly in those who are coming through to services. We'll talk about that later. So just a bit of a snapshot. You probably know this, but mental health, just giving some more information. So problem gamblers scored much higher than the general population screens for psychological distress and serious mental illness. Family violence. 1 in 10 gamblers in counselling reported domestic or other other violent incidents related to their gambling. Crime. We do a lot of work in prisons and working with probation clients. Fraud is the number one crime in terms of problem gambling or gambling harm, and we know this, and this is information taken. We see it anecdotally. We see people who have never committed a crime in their life, and through gambling harm, through being addicted to gambling, they have committed a crime and ended up in prison. I see a lot of we see a lot in the news about our Pacific and Māori women being in prison for benefit fraud, for embezzling money from employers. Now, addiction to gambling does not discriminate. We know that. We have CEOs, we have accountants, we have beneficiaries, we have Pacifica, we have Māori, we have Asian, we have sports stars, we have lawyers, we have educated, we have the non-educated. It does not discriminate. And lastly, alcohol and other drugs. And we know this, high rates of comorbidity with alcohol and drugs. So through a Pacific lens, what does this look like for Pacifica? Now, it seems to be all doom and gloom at the moment, but this is real stuff for us. This is real stuff for our Pacifica and also our Māori populations. 2012 study showed 8% of Pacific population had developed gambling problems, compared to the 2.5% of the general population. 1 in 8 Pacific men compared to 1 in 8 Pacific women. 21% of the face-to-face presentations are Pacifica. It doesn't sound a lot, but when you compare it to our population rate, it was 3 times. 2 in 5 Pacific people were surveyed said that growing up, there was a moderate amount of gambling in the household. It was reported there were higher rates of arguing and in the family because of time and money spent. And also, someone always went without. We see this. We see this with our children. It's closely linked to poverty. It's a cycle. We see this with children not being taken to school because they don't have lunches, or they're at school without lunches. It affects our children. The most harm for New Zealand Pacific is caused by pokie machines. We know this. The stats show it. The people coming through our doors show it. And what we see with this graph in the red and blue is that pokies is number 1 for our Pacifica. Housey, TAB is there, fluctuates a little bit, but you can see the spike of pokies and addiction to pokies for our Pacific community. So, we talk about contributing factors of gambling for Pacifica. Normalisation is one of them. Normalisation of gambling in churches and families. Now, growing up, gambling was normal in my household. Gambling was normal in my church. We fundraised. That's how we built our churches and our preschools. It was a community. It was a social event, Housey. We came together, played our Housey, we went home. When we wanted to raise money in our families, we ran tote tickets. It was in the family. So the normalisation of gambling is a contributing factor to the problems that we're seeing now. It's a slippery slope from community-based gambling activities to a dangerous product like pokie machines. Who's been to a pokie bar? Or even at the casino on the floor of the pokie rooms? Do they look like they're having a good social time? Are they playing the poker machines in their little groups, all huddled around a machine? Are they yahooing because they won? It's the most antisocial form of entertainment I've ever seen. And they call it entertainment because it's legal. We have venues catering to Pacifica. We have Sky City offering Pacifica buffet dinners. We have venues and bars and clubs who are offering free food, free hamburgers to those who are playing in their venue, free drinks. For Pacifica, and I know for Māori, for anyone, when you get something for free, that's cool. When they're feeding you and giving you free drinks, hey, this is the place to be. Places like Sky City, their marketing department, they focus their marketing on vulnerable communities. Chinese New Year, White Sunday. What they have done in the past, and I know they still do now, they get the mamas and papas in there, give them a $2 pension lunch, and the bus doesn't come back to pick them up until 3 hours later. And what do they do in that 3 hours while they're waiting for the bus to come back and pick them up? They're starting to play those machines. Of course, contributing factor is the lack of information, the lack of their socio-economic situation. And that's life at the moment. The prevention part of the work that we do is to raise that bar of education and awareness around a harmful product, a harmful machine at their doorstep. Now, family pressure to support financially, family and church obligation is a contributing factor. Let me tell you, family and church is the biggest protective factor for our Pacifica community. It's good. But when it intersects with gambling harm, it becomes a risk. Our culture is not a risk, ladies and gentlemen. Our Pacific culture is not a risk to harmful behavior. Our culture is a protective factor, but when it intersects with harmful products like pokies or harmful behaviors, that's when it becomes that's when harm is exacerbated. So I am sick of researchers saying that culture is a risk. It's not a risk. Let's change that conversation. Let's change that dialogue. Culture is not a risk. And the last contributing factor to Pacifica problem gambling is access. Access. When you have poker machines down by your dairy, when you have poker machines down by your local schools that your children are exposed to, when it's next to your GP, they say to me, well, what are we going to do? Should we just take them out of the poor communities and put them in the rich areas? I said, yeah, if it gets it out of the poor areas, yeah. It may not be the right thing to do, but hey, I want them out of Otara. I want them out of far north. There needs to be a solution, there needs to be a plan on how we can get dangerous products out of our communities, because access is a huge contributing factor to our Pacifica and to our Māori communities. And we know the impacts of gambling harm. We know that it affects relationships, the connections between us and our children and us and our partners. It affects financial in a huge way. You've got a vicious cycle of money into a machine, going to the loan shark to get more money, to go back into the machine, to win more money, then go back to the loan shark to try to get the money out. They repossess your cars, your home, your business, so forth and so forth and so forth. One of the biggest things I see is the disconnection of our people from who they are as a result of gambling harm. We'll talk about that later. So as I said earlier, gambling does not just affect the gambler, it also has a huge impact on affected others. We are funded to provide the same service to affected others, to family members, to friends who are impacted or affected by that person's gambling. So you can see in this graph, 60% of our clients have been affected others who need help to cope. Now, I was trying to think how I was going to illustrate Pacific people's disconnection as a result of a harmful product. And I want to talk to you and tell you a story about my son. This is my son Derek, 25 years old. And as Saviatama said, Derek got picked to play for the Rabbitohs 6 years ago. And as a 19-year-old, we packed him off and sent him to Sydney. It was a great opportunity for him. He loved it. League was his life. Church was his life. Family was his life back then. And everything was hunky-dory, you know. Last year, I got a call from Derek and he said, "Mum, I need some money." I said, "Oh, son, what's happened?" Realising that Derek was on a fairly big contract. And he said, "Oh, Mum, I've just got myself in a bit of trouble. I'm going to pay it back to you next week." And he asked for $10,000. And by the way, I got permission from Derek to share his story. And as a mum, you know, as a mum, you do anything for your children. And he had that desperate sound in his voice. So I said, okay. Didn't ask any questions. I sent him $10,000. The following month, we were planning a trip to Samoa as a family, and Derek was to come. And he asked me to pay his fare. So I did. In Samoa last year in July, he was different. He was quiet. He was withdrawn. He looked happy on the outside, but his eyes were different. Now, I didn't think much of it because this is my resilient boy. When Sian, my granddaughter, turned 5 in April this year, Derek came home for her birthday. He was only meant to be home for a couple of days, for the weekend, and he came home, and we had Sian's birthday. After Sian's birthday party, and everyone went home, Derek tried to take his life. And his brothers were there, his older brother was there, and I was so shocked. I didn't see this coming. And so we sat down, he cried and cried and cried. I couldn't get a word out of him. And he told me, he finally let out everything that had happened. He said, "Mum, I've failed." He said, "I failed you. I failed our family." He said, "I've gambled every cent I earned on pokies in Sydney. It was either I gambled it, I drank it, or I took it in terms of drug taking." And he said, "I'm so empty inside." He goes, "I don't know what to do." And I sat there trying to process this, and here's my baby pouring out his heart, and I'm thinking, what did I do wrong? I work in this sector. He has been brought up with his mother going to every hui, every workshop, every event, talking about harms of substance abuse, of gambling, of everything. And my boys is meant to be resilient. I'm meant to know the signs. I'm meant to know the signs, and I didn't see it. Didn't see it. So, Derek's story is a story of triumph. He was disconnected. I really relate Derek's story to the story of our people. He was in a foreign land in Sydney by himself. He was disconnected from family support systems. Even though he talked to mum every week, he felt disconnected. He was disconnected spiritually. He was disconnected from his cultural values. Even though he had all his friends, his NRL friends around him and all their support systems, he felt so alone. He was trying to keep up with the Joneses. He was trying to keep up with the NRL boys. And I must tell you, there is a huge problem with our Pacifica and Māori professional players over in Australia and here. Myself and Ronnie Clark are going to look at some work there, Ronnie. But he was physically and mentally not only unwell, but exhausted. He had lost his identity along the way. And as a result of that, he felt like he was an absolute failure. And he wanted to take his own life. So what's happened now that weekend? I went home with Derek. We packed his bags. We were back in New Zealand the next day. And since he's been back home since April, he has reconnected with his nana and papa and his parents. He has reconnected with his spirituality. He has reconnected with his values, not just as a Samoan, but as a young man. He's reconnected with his physical self. He's gone back to train. He's reconnected with his spiritual and his emotional self. Now, with Derek, he needed to get himself well physically before he could get himself well mentally. He's an athlete. And that's been the journey. When Derek came back in April, he was 30 kgs overweight. So that disconnection caused a huge physical manifestation in him. So that's the story of my baby Derek. So I'm going to go through how prevention and intervention works in service delivery and how we, as a Pacific service, Mapu Maya, do this. So, who are we? So, Mapu Maya, Mapu in Samoan means to rest, Maya means to come. So, it's an invitation to come and rest, come and take a load off. So, we're a service. We're the Pacifica unit of the Problem Gambling Foundation of New Zealand. We are funded through the Problem Gambling Foundation, PGF. We provide culturally appropriate support for both the gamblers and the affected others, as well as coexisting issues. We are based in Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch. Talatala noa is a term we use for counselling. You know, the word counselling in the Pacific doesn't make much sense. There is no word for counselling. It's a concept that's quite foreign to us. We use talatala noa because it means to have a conversation. When we talk to Pacific people about counselling, they say it's for crazy people. It's for white people. So we use the concept of talatala noa, having a conversation, trying to break down those barriers. So we have a public health contract, and the public health contract is the prevention part of our work. we're out there. We're out there providing education, raising awareness. We're out there engaging with the community in a way that they are able to have those discussions, those destigmatizing discussions. Because we know that problem gambling carries a huge amount of shame and embarrassment for our people. When they used to see the problem gambling sign a few years back, you can just see their eyes and walk, almost run down the other end. Because it was just a shame and the stigma attached to it. What we do is we make noise about pokie machines and harmful products in our most vulnerable communities. We're doing submissions, we're advocating, we are facilitating the voices of Pacific so they can also speak. So a whole lot of our work is in the prevention space. But we do that in the community, and we link it to interventions, to talatala noa. I'll give you a little bit of information about how we're funded, and it's very different from how GHBs fund, I know, our AOD services. Now, our funding model, we have prevention on one end and clinical or clinical interventions on the other end. And what we've done is we've integrated, we've linked the two. So what happens is our staff, and I've got a few of my staff on that side, but they have dual roles. That's an intentional public health strategy with workforce. It's in their job description that they are out there providing public health activities and prevention and linking it to clinical interventions. So they are the person out in the community, engaging, having these conversations, raising that awareness. They're also the same person who's providing the talatala noa. And it's not talatala noa in a clinical counselling room, it's talatala noa in community-based situations, in the homes. It's talatala noa in the churches, talatala noa in the cafes, in the rugby clubs. Wherever we can deliver talatala noa, that's where we are. We're breaking down those barriers. We are accessing communities. We don't expect the community to try to access us. And I think that's where we need to be in terms of that change of, I keep hearing funders say, how can we increase access? How can we increase access of Pacifica to services? We need to increase our access to our Pacifica. That's what needs to happen. One of the things we're contracted to do is facilitations. We are contracted to work with other sectors to connect our clients to other sectors. Isn't that cool? We're contracted to work with AOD, with budgeters, with food banks, with probation, and that we connect them to the other services. And that's important to keep those connections. Connecting prevention with intervention works in the Pacific community that we work in. It works, and we're successful in it in the approach that we use. We're creating opportunities to engage. We ensure engagement is appropriate with the VAR, and then we introduce or we encourage participation in talatala noa. And I'm running out of time, I'm sorry. So I'm just going to go quickly through this. This is an example of how we've connected prevention, a public health activity, to a clinical outcome. So we had a Samoan song and poem competition for 5 years, and we targeted children. We targeted children from the ages of 5 to 18. We wanted to raise awareness. We wanted to provide opportunities for talatala noa, and we wanted it led by our clinical team. Why? They are the connectors. Even though we targeted children, we really were after their parents. But children, everyone loves children. It's a heart thing, isn't it? The theme for the poems each year was Choose Me, Not Gambling. The children had to write poems on that theme, Choose Me, Not Gambling. So we had huge amounts of success. all the parents came to watch their children at prize giving. It was a competition. So, us Pacifica with competitions were lethal. Here's some of the outcomes. You can see how our public health activity, engagement, soft approaches led to some pretty cool outcomes of clinical talatala no interventions. We have a radio program at the moment called Talanoa Inga Paanga. Now, of course, it's in language. We have our Tongan clinician, Ben, is on the radio every week. He's doing his awareness-raising thing. He's getting other Tongan services in to talk about their services. And, the outcome of that, he runs 2 to 3 therapy groups a week just from that radio station. Couples come together as well as individuals. He's a busy man. But how we connect prevention to clinical outcomes is the key to where we are going with our Pacifica. I want to talk about connections with other sectors. Now, I'm really big on this, and we've got some examples here of how important it is that we connect with other sectors. And Heiwa, in Christchurch, Mapumaya works with a Māori AOD service, Heiwa Katapu, and we provide therapeutic programs for our Māori and Pacific men in the space of AOD and problem gambling. That's real collaboration. Mapumaya also works in the space of family violence in Timaru, collaborative partnership. We work with Emerge Aotearoa in some of the space around mental health. It's another example of how we connect across sectors. And there's many more. But you see, we are around connecting. Huge. It's so important. So here are some of the takeaways. Meaningful collaborations and partnerships, not just on paper, but filled with purpose and meaning. Let's be connected. Let's not be bounded by funding. Funding at the moment causes competition. We know that. Let's change that mindset. Now, I challenge funders to become part of that meaningful collaboration and change how funding models work. We say that we work in collaboration, but sometimes our funding puts up these barriers and walls. I encourage you to think about connecting prevention to your clinical work. And some of you may already do it, but I think when it's intentional, through funding or through strategic workforce development plans, I think that, if you're wanting to reach hard-to-reach communities, that is the way to go. Let's connect the dots. We have been the poor cousin of AOD for many, many years. We don't want to be the poor cousin anymore. We want to be part of the conversation. We want to be part of the solution. Did you know that problem gambling wasn't even part of the mental health and addiction inquiry? We had to push our way in there. But let's change that. Let's speak up for pokies in our communities. We can all do it. Let's speak up for alcohol outlets in our communities. Let's speak up for for any harmful product that's in our communities. I really urge that. We can work together on that. And lastly, reconnection is the pathway to healing for Pacifica. And I come back to the dream. For our people, we reconnect them back to the dream. We reconnect them back to the aspirations of our parents and our grandparents and the reason why we're in Aotearoa, the land of milk and honey, the land where the streets are paved with gold. But, reconnection for our Pacifica is part of the journey of healing. So, and in saying that, I'd like to say thank you, whaftai, whaftai, whaftai te le lava.